The anime was bad this season. Going into this season, I didn't find much excitement beyond Demon Slayer and Attack on Titan, both shows that I've never watched and am never going to watch. And this season, I really only gave a shot to a handful of shows. I only completed 2, and I only really liked 1. So this seasonal review shouldn't take too long, so let's get into it. I don't know what inspires me to give every sports seasonal I encounter a shot. I regretted it last year with Pura Ore, the girls' hockey show, and I regretted it this season with Futsal Boys. Futsal Boys is about some boys who play some futsal. If you don't know what futsal is, it is a version of soccer that can be played either indoors or on smaller concrete courts. I knew I would not like Futsal Boys based off of the poster and the description, but I decided to give it a shot anyway, and it was even worse than I expected. Futsal Boys has ugly characters, a hyper-saturated color palette, and is just an unpleasant show to look at overall. I have yet to watch a soccer-related anime that I like, though there seems to be one coming out in the spring that I will give a shot to. Can't seem to learn my lesson. Sasamiya tells a boys' love flavored story about 2 boys interested in boys' love manga. It's a very meta romance, and I'm sure it's very good at what it does. It's just not a show that is for me. On 2 occasions, I gave it a shot, and I gave up within 10 minutes. I realize I'm not the intended audience because boys' love is typically targeted to straight girls, so I don't want to call it bad. I'll just say that it isn't my type of gayness that I want to see in a show. I have, however, talked to a few people who are very touched by how gracefully it handles its subject matter, and for that, I'm glad the show exists, and I'm glad that it's getting a lot of recognition and positive attention. Akabi's Sailor Uniform is a show about a girl in the countryside who chooses a middle school based off of the sailor uniform that she has to wear while attending the school. This is a pretty standard and uninspired hook, but it was the prettiness of the characters and the scenery that I saw in a preview of the show that drew me in. The entire show looks like it came straight out of a storybook, and it did keep me interested throughout the first episode. But the characters I found rather boring, and I also found the show surprisingly horny, especially for feet, which I have no objection to, just it's not my thing. This is one of 2 Cloverworks shows that made the air this winter, and I'm going to talk about the other one pretty soon, but I want to use this space to talk about the studio as a whole. Cloverworks released 4 shows in 2021. 3 of them I watched, and they all made a pretty significant impact. One of them was Wonder Egg Priority, which was my favorite show of last season, but had a pretty volatile run and left a lot of fans with a sour taste in their mouths by the end of its run. They also produced Horimiya, which has its own stable of fans, but I thought was just okay. And they also produced Season 2 of The Promised Neverland, which I thought was bad and everyone else thought was bad too. Cloverworks, being an offshoot of A1 Studios, obviously has a lot of resources to make shows look as good as possible. It seems like in 2021, they used those resources to take ambitious swings, and not all of those swings made contact. So I think they kind of made a 180 this year and decided to dedicate heavy resources into safer projects. Akebi certainly looks and sounds fantastic because it is a Cloverworks production, but I found it a little too safe to be interesting, and I definitely preferred the more ambitious shows. Salarymen's Club, or Batterymen, is about a company badminton team. As someone who really likes office procedurals and sports, I was kind of looking forward to this show. Corporate sports leagues are big both here in the United States and in Japan, and I was excited to finally see a show that tackled this subject. And Batterymen is fine. I watched the first episode, and it seems like another show that's just trying to capture whatever Haikyuu did well. And honestly, if I liked the main character more, I might have given it more than 1 episode. Our main character is a bit arrogant, standoffish, and mean, doesn't really care to learn from his surroundings, and for that reason, I didn't find him interesting or worth following. It's probably a fine show, and if I had more time this season, I might have given it a shot week to week. But I made a promise to myself last year that I was only going to continue shows that I really liked from the first episode. Except I immediately broke that this season because there was a show about baseball. And it was bad, but I finished it. Tribe 9 follows a group of youngsters as they navigate the violent and lawless streets of Neo-Tokyo. As you can probably already tell, this show steals a lot from Akira, and it doesn't care to hide it. Except instead of our street gangs fighting on motorcycles, they fight by playing a futuristic version of baseball played on the streets of their own tribe's ward. The mechanics and the aesthetics of the game itself are pretty interesting. And the best reason to watch this show is to see what an idea of baseball in the future might look like. But unless you're a child, that's probably going to be the only reason to watch. I didn't like Tribe 9 at all, and if this show was about anything other than baseball, I may not have given it 10 minutes. The jokes are really juvenile, the structure of the city doesn't make sense, and it doesn't have any inspiring messages beyond teamwork is good and it's good to keep fighting. This show is part of a multimedia franchise that I think includes a mobile game, so it doesn't surprise me that the show spends a lot more time and effort on aesthetics than it does plot. And the aesthetics at times do look quite nice, and if I cared more about action scenes, I probably would have had a higher opinion about this show. But the plot is really hollow to begin with and falls apart completely 3 episodes before the end. There's a scene in the penultimate episode where key players from tribes our main team is already defeated come together to help our heroes try to defeat the main boss. It's supposed to uplift us because now we spend more time with now redeemed characters that we've already met. But I felt nothing watching it because this show gave me nothing to latch onto. I won't call it the worst baseball anime because I'm clearly not the target audience, and in all honesty, it's not the worst baseball anime. But after a nearly 2-year absence of baseball shows, I'm not sure this is the show that I wanted to come back to. But I did finish it, so it gets a final score of 5 out of 10, and that might be a little generous. There wasn't a lot of new stuff to get excited about this season, but the unquestioned champion newcomer, the so-called darling of the season, was Bisque Doll, or my dress-up darling. And in any other season, the show probably doesn't come near the top, but in a season so barren of quality, this was pretty clearly the best show. Bisque Doll follows our 2 high school students as they develop a friendship and eventually a romantic interest in each other. Our boy is Wakana Gojo, descended from a family of doll makers, and a person who is absurdly dedicated to his craft but lacking in social skills and friends and emotional maturity. Our girl is Kitagara Marin, the popular, sexy, and fashionable and ebullient high schooler, who just happens to openly love anime and manga and gaming and cosplay. In essence, Gojo is the stand-in for the typical viewer of the show, and Marin the manic otaku dream girl that our viewer might be looking for. On the surface, I do not like any of this. I do not like romance shows where it is unclear why the girl might be interested in our main boy. I do not like romance shows where the girl that falls for the uninteresting boy is so unreasonably tuned to unrealistic standards. However, I think Bisque Doll overcomes these problems and works for 2 main reasons. The first is that it spends a lot of time developing Gojo and shows why Marin might fall for him. We get introduced to him as a lonely craftsman uninterested in literally anything else. But as his friendship with Marin develops, we see the selfless and caring and dedicated side of him that emerges. This is one of those rare shows that gets better with each passing episode, and it's because Gojo gets better with each passing episode. It makes the viewer feel good, and it also makes the developing romance seem sincere. The second reason this show works is because it's absurdly gorgeous. Much like they did with Akebi, Cloverworks seems to have put in a lot of resources to make this show look as good as possible. But instead of the storybook countryside we get in Akabi, we get a very glitzy and sharp urban cityscape in Bisque Doll, and I prefer that setting 10 times out of 10. The character design is wonderful, the costumes are immaculate, and the visual gags work really, really well. Of course, it's hard to talk about Bisque Doll's aesthetics without talking about fan service. I admit that I am not equipped to handle a deep conversation about fan service. What I will say is that I generally do not find anything in a drawing to be objectionable for any reason, but I also understand anyone who wouldn't be comfortable with this show's horniness. And my god, is this show horny. Animated lewdness doesn't really do it for me, and I'm not going to say that Bisque Doll does it for me either, but I will say that there were many points throughout this show that made me feel 11 years old again. And that was really confusing, but also strangely nostalgic. Just like anything this show animates, the fan service is extremely well done, and if you're into that type of thing, I'm sure you're going to love it. What keeps me from loving this show is the cosplay angle. I do not like dressing up for Halloween or any other reason. I do not like cosplay. I do not care for that world one bit. I think I might have enjoyed this show a lot more if it were about simple street fashion or high fashion instead of cosplaying, but then there wouldn't be the otaku angle, and I realize you have to grab that audience somehow. I also think it was a huge missed opportunity to have a show about fashion have the lead guy only wear 2 outfits the entire show. I understand this show is about girl, but it's okay to get boy involved as well. In a better season, I might have treated this show as something to look forward to every week, but not something necessarily to gush about or recommend highly to anyone. But it wasn't, so there you have it. Bisque Doll is the best show of the winter season. It was a solid 7 out of 10, and I hope spring provides some better options.